dangerous drugs, Senator Pampilo Lacson. And to introduce individual amendments, may we recognize the minority leader, Mr. President, Senator Ralph Recto.
Senator Lacson and Senator Ralph Recto, our minority floor leader, are recognized.
Thank you. Correction, Mr. President, maybe, yes, of course, the chairman, but may we recognize Senator De Lima first before Senator Recto.
Senator De Lima is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is now the period of individual amendments. Following our discussion with the honorable sponsor and also some discussions with Senator Frank Drilon, I move that we delete Section 1 of Senate Bill number 1239 and insert a new section which I'll read as follows. Section 1, a new section 26-A shall be inserted after Section 26 of Republic Act number 6795, which will read as follows. Section 26-A, subpoena powers. The PNP Chief, Director, and Deputy Director of the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group, CIDG, referred to as the Criminal Investigation Unit in Section 35B4 of this Act, shall have the power to administer oath and issue subpoena and subpoena juices tecum in relation to its investigation, provided that such powers shall be exercised solely by the aforementioned officials and may not be further delegated to any other person or office. The second paragraph of this new Section 26A would also read in this manner, or in this wise. The subpoena shall state the nature and purpose of investigation, shall be directed to the person whose attendance is required, comma. May I read this again? The second paragraph. The subpoena shall state the nature and purpose of investigation, comma, shall be directed to the person whose attendance is required, comma, and in the case of a subpoena juices tecum, comma, it shall also contain a reasonable description of the books, documents, or things demanded, which must be relevant to the investigation. Then the next paragraph of the same new Section 26A would read this way. Failure to comply with subpoena and subpoena juices tecum shall authorize the filing of a case for indirect contempt under Rule 71 of the Rules of Court with the Regional Trial Court. May I briefly explain my proposed amendment? I believe that it would be better if the subpoena power of the PNP officials be stated in a new section, rather than just stating it in general that the law, Republic Act number 6795, would now be authorizing the taking or the issuance of subpoena by the PNP through the stated officials. The power to administer oaths and subpoena should not be given to the director of CIDG to the exclusion of the PNP chief. That's the very proposal, in fact, of Senator Frank Drilon, which I am also adopting and proposing. Thus, the same power should be given to both offices. The authority to issue subpoenas compelling the testimony of witnesses or the production of evidence is a broad power that is susceptible to abuse. And therefore the qualification seeks to prevent, and I'm referring to the second paragraph of the proposed new provision. It seeks to prevent the arbitrary and indiscriminate issuance of the subpoena to lower ranking. I'm sorry, I'm still referring to the non-delegation of the power. It seeks to prevent the arbitrary and indiscriminate issuance of the subpoena to lower ranking officers. This proposed amendment also seeks to put in standards. We know that there are standards for the issuance of subpoena, both under the rules of court and under case law or jurisprudence. Now, we are minded to adopt the standards laid down by jurisprudence, and one example is the case of Evangelista versus Harencio. This is a 1975 case wherein the Supreme Court provides the basic requirements for due process in the exercise of subpoena powers to law enforcement agencies. Although the proposed amendment does not really quote those standards laid down in that case law, that case of Evangelista versus Harencio, this representation feels that the proposed second paragraph of this new provision, section 26-A, which is actually the proposal of Senator Frank Drilon, would very well address the need for standards. It would be prudent for us to include by express mention in the proposed amendment the standard laid out for the proper exercise of subpoena powers. And the express mention by reference of the relevant provisions of the rules of court would ensure that this power may not be abused by the PNP officials by subjecting this power to the available checks by the judiciary. And with respect to the penultimate or the last proposed paragraph of the proposed new section 26-A, this representation would want to remind everyone that the PNP cannot be given the power to hold any person in contempt for failure to comply with a subpoena. With willful failure to comply with subpoena will authorize a case for indirect contempt under Rule 71 of the Rules of Court. It can be filed with the regional trial court having jurisdiction over the place where the subpoena is issued. That is in fact the prevailing rules, even insofar as other administrative subpoenas are concerned. So, Mr. President, that is the amendment being proposed by this representation in consultation and in coordination with Senator Frank Drilon and also with the good sponsor.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Yes, the minority floor leader is
With the
recognized.
permission of the majority leader, may I ask for a minute suspension?
1 minute suspension.
Ready to resume. Mr. President.
Session is resumed. The Senate Minority Leader is now recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I saw clarification from the sponsor of the motion before it was accepted, Mr. President. I generally agree with the nature of the amendments for us in the minorities to vote properly. But may I make an amendment to the amendment, Mr. President? Is it in order for me to make an amendment to the amendment?
Mr. Majority Floor Leader,
Amendment to the amendment. Allowed naman.
there is a
The bill is not a substitute bill, right?
It is a substitute bill, Mr. President.
substitute.
It's a substitute bill.
Yes, it is.
Amendment to the amendment that is being proposed is acceptable, Mr. President. Yes.
Then that is in order. Senate Minority Leader is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a clarification from the sponsor of this amendment to the gentle lady, Senator Laila de Lima. Mr. President, my understanding of the bill, Senate Bill 1239, is that it is only the director and the deputy director of the CIDG which is being authorized to issue a subpoena and to administer the oath. My understanding of the amendment is one, it limits it to the director and deputy director of the CIDG. So there's a limitation. But then it further adds that the chief PNP can also issue a subpoena and administer the oath. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. President.
Okay. Mr. President, there is an idea here similar to how we conduct investigations in the Senate and in for purposes of issuing subpoenas. The chairman of a committee in the Senate cannot issue a subpoena but can only recommend to the Senate President. Following this practice, Mr. President, the recommendation from the minority is that only the chief PNP be given the authority to issue a subpoena, and that the upon the recommendation of the CIDG director, and that the director of the CIDG is authorized only to administer the oath in such cases. Would the lady
The proponent
from
of
Bicol
the amendment
be amenable?
concur with the before we ask the author.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm afraid that even if I do recognize the wisdom of the proponent of the amendment to
It would
the
appear that the
amendment,
wisdom of the incidentally, this is the I was requested by a member of the minority, particularly Senator Trillanes, to sponsor this amendment. And I'm glad that the gentle lady recognizes the wisdom of this amendment.
yes, I do recognize the wisdom of the amendment, but I'm afraid that it would actually cause some limitations or unreasonable
But that is the idea, to cause the limitation.
complications insofar as the operational aspects of this amendment, because if we adopt that proposed amendment, that it is only upon the recommendation or that the CIDG director and the deputy director on their own, at their level, cannot issue subpoena, but instead be just recommending to the chief PNP, who will be the one to issue. And it is only the PNP chief who would be issuing, then it would create some operational difficulties in the sense that the PNP chief itself has has a very vast area also of concerns and responsibilities that would require him to be everywhere and anywhere in this country to address very pressing problems of peace and order.
But
And it might entail operational difficulties. And if we compare also the existing subpoena powers of certain other investigative bodies like the NBI. I can cite NBI as a perfect example. The grant of subpoena powers is up to the regional director level, although with good reason, because even regional directors of NBI are required to be lawyers. That is not the case insofar as PNP is concerned. So I'm
And
afraid
that's
that
precisely the point. What we're doing here right now is that the NBA is allowed to issue the subpoenas because they are lawyers. But the CIDG head may not be a lawyer. The deputy may not be a lawyer.
and so
In
does
fact,
the PNP
the chief PNP, and that's why the minority here is already bending backward to accommodate the request of the majority to allow to give the CIDG and the chief PNP, or at least the PNP in general, the authority to issue subpoenas and to administer oath.
We must note, Mr. President, that the original measure was to grant subpoena powers only to the director and the deputy director of the CIDG.
And it may be delegated.
No,
No longer.
there's no such.
There's no such provision.
That's right. That's right.
There's
That
no
is correct. I
such,
stand corrected. Correct. I stand corrected. But to the CIDG and its deputy. Now, operationally, how difficult will this be? Recommendatory as CIDG director.
Again,
What does the chief PNP have to do to sign a document? So it is merely a signature that you're requesting. He may be abroad, he may be in the country, and it is recognized that you can do it by electronic. Electronically. So regardless of where the chief PNP is, if he thinks that this is important, it is an issue of importance as far as the chief PNP is concerned. If he thinks that it is not important, he will not sign it. It's a fail-safe mechanism, Mr. President.
but the CIDG has, the mandate of the CIDG is such that we can expect or that we see that it handles numerous cases under its very mandate, under the same law, Republic Act number 6975. And therefore, the PNP chief cannot be expected to really be familiar with those cases under investigation by the CIDG. And we are opening doors to the chief PNP just really signing subpoenas, and without him really uh, uh, determining for himself the necessity of issuing the subpoena. But if we directly grant the director and the deputy director of the CIDG, then we can expect that they are actually more acquainted with the facts of the case that would justify the issuance of subpoena. I don't know, Mr. President, but I think we should give the good sponsor himself the chance to justify the
Elevating the
as the
with the
former chief
information of
PNP.
the distinguished colleagues on the floor. Is there an assumption that the director and the deputy director of CIDG are responsible people, and we can entrust to them?
I think that they are responsible, but I think the chief PNP would be more responsible as the supervising authority.
But that will add to bureaucratic red tape, Mr. President. If we allow only the chief PNP or authorize only the chief PNP to sign a subpoena to Sisteco, then it will somehow affect negatively. It will impact on the urgency of certain situations when CIDG is conducting an investigation. So, may I plead to the Mr. President, distinguished colleague from Bicol, you know, I feel lucky that there are only one Ralph Recto and one Trillanes in the minority. You can just imagine if there are two or more Rectos and two or more Trillanes.
No need, Mr. President. 3 against 21 is okay with us, Mr. President.
That's why. That's why. You can just imagine if there are two or more rectos and two or more Trillaneses.
Just an
And 2
additional
or more
point.
lilacs.
Just an additional point, Mr. President. We should remember that there are other units under the PNP. CIDG, or the former CIU, is just one of them. There are other units under the organization and all under the PNP chief. And the power now being restored to the CIU, now the CIDG, can simply be confined to the own expertise of the investigators within that particular unit.
As a matter of fact, the intention of this bill, of this proposed measure, is to allow the chief PNP to sign only for the CIDG,
Yes.
being the primary investigative unit of the PNP. He cannot assign subpoena and subpoena doses taken for other units of the PNP because anyway they're not involved in investigation.
Now, Mr. President, I think the issue has been sufficiently discussed. Before I question the forum, may I ask for a minute suspension?
1 minute suspension. Sabi na eh, pupunta pag hindi in-accept.
I have only a manifestation, Mr. President.
Ready to
sorry,
resume,
sorry.
Mr. President.
Session is resumed. The author, the chair of the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs is recognized.
Yes, I have already discussed this with the proponent of the first amendment, the original amendment, to delete the Rule 71 in the proposed amendment simply because the Supreme Court might in the future amend Rule 71. So instead, delete Rule 71 and instead, after the word under and of, under the rules of court with the regional trial court. If that is acceptable to the proponent of the amendment, Mr. President.
Should that be acceptable to the...
Just delete the word or the words Rule 71 of. Those three words.
Accepted.
Thank you, Mr. President. And also, there may be a necessity to change the title.
Let's do that later. Let's act on this motion first. The proposed
Majority
amendment
Leader.
of Senator De Lima as amended. If the
That is the
Minority
motion.
Leader has withdrawn his proposed amendment to the amendment,
Thank you.
and the sponsor has accepted the amendment.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we now continue with the individual amendments, changing the title of the measure, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried. The sponsor of the measure is now recognized.
The title of the measure will now read, an act granting the Chief PNP and the Director and Deputy Director of the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group the authority to administer oath and to issue subpoena and subpoena duces tecum, amending for the purpose Republic Act 6975 as amended, otherwise known as the DILD Act of 1990.
No objection, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair is none. Motion is carried.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
So motion to close the period of amendments. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Move to approve on second reading Senate Bill 1239, Mr. President, under Committee Report number 10.
Is there any objection? The chair hearing none. The motion to approve Senate Bill number 1239 is approved on second reading. Is there a majority
President,
leader?
move for 1 minute suspension.
Session is suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one housekeeping. Well, supposedly I was going to call the expanded anti-wiretapping act ang walang kamatayan anti-wiretapping. But because our colleagues have been here or have been working since 5 a.m. because they had to wake up at 5:30 or 5 o'clock.
I can relate.
We will take up the anti-wiretapping tomorrow.
Yes, the minority floor leaders
Mr.
recognize.
President, is it possible that when we take up the wiretapping act, that the sponsor of the measure show us some equipment on wiretapping? Can you produce some equipment here in the Senate so that we are all familiarized with wiretapping equipment?
Perhaps during during the period of individual amendments, Mr. President. We will request the COMSEC of the Committee on Rules to place the anti-wiretapping early so that Senator Risa Ontiveros does not have to wait too long until her interpellation on the matter on the measure, Mr. President. Thank you. So, Mr. President, with the consent of the body, after conferring with the matter to the concerned committee chairs, I move that we transfer the primary referral of Senate Bill 507, the Jail Integration Act, from the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to the Committee on Civil Service as primary referral, Mr. President. Secondary to the Committee on